Hello there, sword friends. This is going to be a review of a Munetoshi T10 differentially hardened performance cutting katana. That's a mouthful, but it's from their performance cutting series and style and shape, and all of that, I suppose, is in the name. Anyway, here's the things that I think about it. There are a couple things that I need to note before I go further in this review. One, first and foremost, this is courtesy of sword friend Brian. He sent me his sword and asked me to review it, and I am happy to do so. Especially happy with this one right here, because I've wanted to review a Munetoshi sword for a while, and really I can't think of a better one to start off with. Anyway, the point is that it is in effect secondhand and may not be 100% representative of what you would get if you were to order one from Sword and Armory today. Two, I'm not an expert of any kind. I am just a hobbyist, a practitioner, an enthusiast. I'm not a master. And anyway, take whatever I say as my personal opinion and with a grain of salt at that. On to the hoobly-doobly things. This sword right here retails for $424.98, and in effect that puts it towards the upper price point of what is available from Munetoshi. Now, Munetoshi swords aren't as widely available as many other sword manufacturers are from multiple other dealers. It seems like most of the time they are purchased and distributed by Sword and Armory, and I'll put a link in the description below. Now, I've never personally dealt with Sword and Armory, but I've known lots of people that have, and I don't really hear any complaints. So they seem like a reputable place, and they seem to be about the only place you can get Munetoshi. Though I could be off on that. If I am, there are some options or places in the description or links or commentary, the thingy below here. Now, as I look at the Munetoshi website, the thing that I often try to compare and contrast is the advertised specifications to the actual specifications. And here, these specifications are actually pretty accurate. The length of the blade is advertised at 28 inches, and that's exactly what I was able to measure on this one. The handle length, or ska, was measured at 10.5 on the website. I have 10.75, but, you know, there's a little forgiveness with the curvature of the kashira if you want to. Anyway, it's pretty close. The Sori is advertised at 0.7 inches. That's exactly what I got, and the weight is 2 pounds 4 ounces. This particular example I have is measured at 2.3 ounces. Now, the remainder of the advertisements are really tough for me to tell you if they're accurate or not accurate, because I can't tell if this is synthetic or not, and I can't tell if it's T10 steel or not T10 steel. Some people can tell by looking. I'm not personally that capable. It's also noted that some of the fittings are made from brass. It does look like it's made from brass, though the tsuba looks like it's made from steel. Not entirely sure, but overall, everything seems good and seems like what they say it is exactly what you're getting. Let's talk about some of the features. So if I start at the kashira right here, this little end cap, it's simple. I like that, the aesthetics personally. Some of the casting quality has rubbed off ever so slightly. There are some lines here that seem to dull off, so it's not the most refined quality in terms of casting. But the patina, or whatever is on it to color it, is held up pretty well. And I also noticed that the fit and how it lines up to the ska actually fits on pretty well. The transitions line here, and there's no way for me to really stick my finger on and have it catch on any ledges. So from a functionality standpoint, it feels pretty good. The ito itself, as I go to the handle here, is tight. That's kind of the first thing I want to look at. I can push it. If I move my thumb, I can move the ito around, but it's not really, it doesn't move that easily, and I would consider this very serviceable, very usable. It could be tighter, but for what it is, it's perfectly functional. I also like the handle shape. Now, it has this kind of nice hourglass figure. I don't exactly know what you call that. I think it's roko or some sort of shape that is a kind of hourglass shape. It's also kind of slender, so for my large glove hand size, I can, have these big sausage fingers, but it's really easy for me to index the blade. It's very comfortable for me to grip. It's a bigger handle, but it doesn't feel so large that it feels like an axe handle or it feels cumbersome or awkward to grip. It's very comfortable in my hand. It's got some black samegawa under it. I can kind of make out where the panels are, or at least I think I can, and if I push the same around, I don't really see the ledges very easy. Sometimes if I push the ito up and down, I can kind of see the edge of the panel. I don't really see or make that out very much here. The minuki will move around ever so slightly if I push on them. That seems pretty practical. They're not glued down, though I don't know that they're supposed to be. Now, also note here that the mikugi is black and this one isn't. Now, originally this came with another black mikugi, but I tried to take the handle off, and when I did, this mikugi came out and was, well, it didn't survive the process. These were really, really difficult to get out, and then even after I got them out, the handle would not come off. So I stopped fighting that battle, and I decided to just replace the Mikugi and put it back together, but I never successfully actually got the handle off. So I don't know if it's cracked. I do know that in terms of disassembly and cleaning, at least in this particular example, it's a real sumbitch to get off. Now, I tried kind of gently applying pressure, pushing on. I also wrapped the tsuba with a cloth, and I gave it a little tap with a rubber mallet. None of that really seemed to be moving the handle off, so that left me in a position where I was going to have to apply a pretty profound amount of pressure, and this is not my sword. I want to return it. Me hitting the sword with a hammer to try and get the handle off is an unnecessary risk to take. I would rather return a functional sword than risk breaking something in the process. I don't mind doing it if it's my stuff, but I'm a little leery when it's somebody else's. Anyway, as we move on, the handle, note that it did not come off really well. It almost made me think there was some third hidden Mikugi in here, but alas, there was not. The fuchi is very much similar to the kashira here in terms thematically it should be, but I noticed that there are just some casting imperfections if I'm being very meticulous here. It has a nice color. It fits on. The transitions from a functional standpoint are fine. It fits really good, but there are some imperfections in terms of the casting on the piece itself. Now also, as I look at the transitions or how the matching is here, the saya and the fuchi do match pretty well. It's mildly larger on one side, but I would say this is well within tolerance for, something good. The tsuba as well, I have to give Munetoshi some compliments on the furniture that they use. I've seen a lot of their swords have just different tsuba, so I'm not exactly sure where they're made, though. I'd speculate they're probably made in Longchuan or Longquan, China, however you pronounce it. I don't know that for certain, but the fittings and furniture they use kind of have a unique flair that doesn't make them blend in with every other mass production company out there that makes swords. They have a way of making things that are simple and elegant at the same time, and so I have to give tip of my hat. This tsuba in particular is just a simple kind of tombo or dragonfly cutout, and it has like a hammered finish that's been blued, but I think it looks really, really good. It's a very pretty looking tsuba to my eyes anyway, though that's a very subjective thing. Let's talk about the saya. So the saya here fits on the blade pretty well. It doesn't inherently fall out, but it will if given enough. It's a little loose, but well within tolerance again. As I look at the habaki, it does fit in well and does what it's supposed to do. The koiguchi really on this hasn't been used very much. It hasn't been drawn with a lot. It hasn't been handled a lot. So for what it is, this is perfectly acceptable. Munetoshi notes on this sword that the habaki is designed in some sort of special way and sets the tone for the sword, or at least maybe that's how I read the information. That's an interesting kind of thought process and theory. This is a kind of brass habaki, and maybe it's just the metal that I see. It is different, I suppose, than every other habaki. It has a marginally different kind of shape to it. It fits on the sword reasonably well. I have no complaints about the overall fitting on the blade itself. Everything is tight, and it does its job. But the investment that they put, or the note that they put on the habaki as it relates to their website, seemed like like it bears a bigger part in the crafting of a sword or the thought process of a sword than I've really let on, or that I've thought about personally. So it gives me a chance to think on that a little bit. I don't know that I necessarily agree, but I'm not that smart, so there you go. Looking at the saya, the transitions here in the lacquer work are not bad. But if I talk about the lacquer work, this one came with some kind of goofy smudges on the lacquer work itself. It might be kind of tough to make it out, or maybe you can see it, but there's kind of like the lacquer wasn't done and it almost looks stained. Now again, this isn't my sword, so I'm not going to do much to clean it off. I suspect that taking a little bit of mother's mag or a polish of some sort and working it out would probably clean that off. It doesn't look too bad, but again, I don't want to risk damaging it worse. So otherwise, everything seems to be in pretty good order. I like the overall shape, though it is very substantial in terms of how thick the saya is. The handle's very elegantly shaped, but the saya is kind of uniformly thick all the way down, and I think it could taper a little bit more. It also has some kind of ripples in the surfaces. It's not sanded perfectly smooth, but At the same time, for what you're paying for, I would say that it's a perfectly functional saya and right on par with everything else that's around the $500 price point. Now let's talk about the pointy stabby part. So first off, as I look at the pointy stabby part, the blade has a mirror polish. You can make out the hamon, but it's subtle and it's a little tough to see. It comes out in the right light, but it's not really the polish on this blade that's the selling feature. It's the geometry and that it's really made to do cutting. So the fact that the Yokote is not polished on super well, or that you can't make out some of the features and admire it really easily, isn't something that I'm necessarily going to hold against it. As I look at it though, in terms of manufacturing quality, I don't see a lot of ripples along the surface of the blade. It seems quite nice. The overall gentle distal taper that it has along the blade is well done and well suited. And yeah, you know, I'd have to say that for its intended purpose, the overall construction quality of the blade is quite nice. It doesn't have a lot of niku. That's, you know, it doesn't have a really swelled kind of convex edge, but it's not really meant to. It's meant to cut grass. So for what it is, I think the blade is quite good, and it reminds me of the Hanwei XL line or Elite line or the MAS kind of competition cutting. There's other options out there with this kind of wide and thin blade profile. And from the other swords that I felt, they don't necessarily feel quite as good in my hand, but know that there are other options out there. It's competing with swords in a price category that are designed to do this, from anywhere from $200 at the, you know, practical XL line all the way up to $2,000 at some of the higher end MAS blades. Anyway, I think what I have to do to really appreciate the blade is back up and look at the whole shape. In terms of what it's designed to do as a tatami mat cutter, it has really the right shape. It's got a wide, thick blade. It's thin, but also has a really nice gradual distal taper. The kind of tapering point of the Sori being, you know, less than an inch. It doesn't have a very deep curvature, and the curvature is deepest kind of right in the center of the blade. It's a very complementary shape to its task, which is really to be a performance cutter for, I believe, pretty specifically tatami mats. And to that end, it feels great. This is one of the better feeling swords that I have felt. Now, it's 2 pounds, 3 ounces. That sounds like a lot, but it's really, maybe it doesn't. It shouldn't. It's kind of on the medium light side of swords, and I don't have the statistics to necessarily back that up, but from the personal experiences I had, the swords that I've measured and weighed, 2 pounds, 3 ounces seems to be on the lighter side. Not the lightest, but definitely on the lighter side of swords. And given that this has this very kind of stout, imposing presence, you would think that it would be heavy, but it's not. It's really quite nimble in the hand. It's very easy to control. I feel very connected to it. It also makes a tachikaze or a suji, the whistling sound, very easily. And I feel like I can really control where that whistling sound comes in. I feel very connected to the sword, very in control of it. It's very easy. Tip control is quite good. Handling wise, I had a lot of fun with it. It's easy to do noto with. It's easy to draw and do EI with. I wouldn't mind moving it around and using it as an EI toe. It's a little bit thick, but really I experienced no discomfort in using the blade for something other than cutting, which I actually found a little bit surprising. I thought it would be more cumbersome to move this around. Don't get me wrong, I'd still prefer a really light aluminum blade, so one, I don't cut myself, and two, it's easy, but considering the weight and how big it is, I thought it was way easier to work with than I expected. So in terms of handling and using it as an EI toe, all that's well and good, but really what you probably want to know is how well does it cut stuff. So what I did is I took it to water bottles first, and honestly, it cut through water bottles like a laser beam. It's not really supposed to, that shouldn't come as any surprise. Now, I cut kind of larger plastic jugs. I didn't cut anything with really hard edges. Water bottles can be a really kind of touchy subject, you might say. And that is because sometimes water bottles can be very thick and made of very rigid plastic, and sometimes, like milk jugs or things like that, often tend to be made of a very soft plastic. I drifted more towards the softer plastics, but in terms of edge alignment and how it moved, I just felt it was very easy to cut with it. The other thing that I then did is I cut with tatami, or I cut tatami mats, and honestly, it was a joy. It makes me want to buy one. It cut through tatami like a laser. I felt really in control. I was able to do and execute some of the cuts on tatami more accurately and better than I typically do, and I think a lot of it I have to give credit to this sword. I'm getting a little better at cutting the stuff myself, but honestly, this as a tool for cutting tatami was really a joy to work with. I found it extremely easy to cut through the tatami. I found it very easy to aim, and I was a little bit more accurate in getting the cut that I was trying to get. It was also really easy for me to execute kind of upward diagonal cuts, and some of those things are a little tricky for me to do, but I was actually able to hit a few things that I wouldn't normally get. I tried doing some more advanced cuts towards the end, and I was actually able to not really pull them off. I wouldn't call this, the things I was able to do with it, competitive or excellent, but normally if I try to do anything advanced while I'm trying to cut tatami, I look like a buffoon, or I knock the mat all the way off, or I tip my stand over, or I just throw little splinters everywhere, and I did marginally better than that. And I think a lot of that has to do with the tool. This was a pleasure to cut tatami mats with. Now, when I cut some other stuff like pumpkins and things like that, because it is the season, it all worked really well, but you know, I didn't notice that this sword was excelled at it, though pumpkins aren't a common target. In terms of water bottles, it moved. It wasn't necessarily the best experience. It was heavier than like a really light trick cutting blade. Where I really noticed it stand out above other swords I've cut with was on tatami. This was a real fun blade to cut with in terms of tatami, and I didn't expect that. This is definitely one of the most fun blades that I've gotten to cut tatami mats with. Anyway, the next thing I can say is, you know, I've talked about that it's comfortable to use in terms of handling, not the most, but pretty comfortable, and that it cut tatami mats really well. What I noticed after I did tatami mat cutting was something a little bit unfortunate, and that is that this blade was cracked. So when I say the sword is cracked, what I mean to say is after I was done doing cutting, I was cleaning the blade off, and I felt something underneath my fingers as I was cleaning, you know, the water bottle glue and goop and pumpkin chunks off the blade. And I looked, and on closer inspection, I saw what amounts to a very little crack on the ha. Now, the reason that this is important is that basically this is like the end of the sword, right? It can be used for EI, but it's not really safe to do cutting with. At any point, that crack could open up, and the top part of the blade could turn into a helicopter of death. So it's not a good thing to cut with. So I didn't know exactly when that happened. I sent an email to Brian right away, and I said, hey, I don't know exactly when this happened. Here's the mediums that I cut, but I have no idea when the crack happened. I didn't feel anything. Upon further inspection of the photos I took prior to doing cutting, though, I was able to see that the crack did exist. I just, you know, completely overlooked it because it is small, and from what I can tell, the crack didn't grow with any of the cuts that I did with it. Now, I don't really know from a metallurgical standpoint if that makes the sword safe, but in effect, the sword is cracked, and that does make it kind of an unsafe thing to use. So, Brian contacted Sword and Armory. He copied me on some of the emails, and everything that he told them was really on the up and up. And there are a couple outcomes that came from that, which I think are a mixture of good and bad, but really mostly good. First and foremost, Brian told Sword and Armory everything that I told him in terms of what I cut. He further added his experience with the sword and the mediums that he cut. And as soon as it was made apparent that this, basically the crack on the sword existed prior to me doing any types of cutting, they offered to do an exchange. So I'm going to actually send the sword off to Sword and Armory, and they are going to exchange the sword for Brian, which I think is really awesome. Very good customer service, standing behind the product. I think that's fantastic. The other thing that I suppose I should note is that in the email, there is an exchange that said we cut some water bottles and pumpkins, and their response was really that this is geared to cut tatami mats, but that pumpkins as well as water bottles are kind of outside the realm of acceptable targets to use on this. Now, to their point, depending on the pumpkin, I cut rather small pumpkins, but if you're cutting, you know, 58-pound large pumpkins, that might be a little bit much for the sword, and we didn't specify a size. Two, Brian was very clear on what water bottles he was using, but if you're not familiar with water bottles and you're just, you know, thinking, oh, maybe they cut Gatorade bottles, or you know, the thick stem of a neck of a water bottle can chip a blade and can cause some problems, especially depending on how thick the plastic is and where it is on the water bottle. So I understand that they might not consider that an acceptable target, though I think it's not necessarily super clear on their website. It says that it's a performance cutter, but and it does put a note on the website that, you know, they can't be held liable for cutting things that are outside, the realm of acceptable targets. But I don't necessarily think it's inherent that, basically pumpkins, produce, or water bottles fall in that realm of unacceptable. I think as a company they could probably make that a little clearer, but that would just be my feedback. In terms of customer service though, they seem quite good. So this brings me to the question, do I think it's actually worth it? And before I answer that, let me state that this kind of unequivocally seems to be a piece geared towards somebody who's gonna cut tatami mats with it. That's really its main focus, and that would be, well, the point I would guess reiterate, and that is that if you're trying to cut tatami mats, then I consider you a valid customer for this blade. But if you're not going to cut tatami, you're going to cut water bottles, you're going to practice EI, you're not really ever going to cut tatami mats, then I don't think that this is really the piece for you. It doesn't mean that Munetoshi doesn't have something else for you, or that there isn't a myriad of other blades for you to choose from, but I would say that categorically this one would just not be the right fit. It's not bad for what it is in terms of using it as an EITO or for EI. It's not bad to cut other things, but the manufacturer seems, pretty inclined to say that water bottles, pumpkins, and other types of things are really not appropriate targets for it. So I don't know that I would use it as my oh shit button for the zombie apocalypse, or that it would be my top choice for somebody that's looking to do EI but wants something a little meatier. For those customers, I would say it's probably not the best choice. But if you are looking for a tatami mat cutting blade, a big grass cutter, a lawnmower, then you would probably fit well within this blade, or at least it's a consideration. At $425 at regular price, I think it's honestly not a bad deal. And I say that knowing that this blade came with a crack in it. So let me preface, there are a myriad of other products that are available that are also wide. Well, maybe not a myriad, but there are a few. One, there's the Chinese SGC. I don't have one of those on me right now, and it's been a little while, but for what I remember of the blade, I didn't really like the way it felt. It felt cumbersome and heavy in my hand, but those are the impressions that I have from a couple years back when I had one handy. There's also a myriad of blades from MAS. Though if I look at MAS competition cutting blades, they're usually between $1,000 and $2,000 for some of the the L6 blades that they have. And dynamically, I've felt very comfortable MAS blades in my hands as well. However, they're making them with L6 or whatever tricks they're using, they generally tend to feel pretty good. Not always, but in general. And they have a nice wide profile like this blade does. So some of them can be intended to do the same type of thing. The other blades that really come to mind are the Hanwei XL and Elite series blades. Now they have the Practical line, which you can get a Practical XL on Cult of Athena for around $200, and then they go all the way up to the Tiger Elite. And as I compare, the Munetoshi Performance Cutter to the Hanwei Tiger Elite, one of the higher end, kind of wider profile blades that isn't necessarily inherently geared just for tatami cutting, but is also going to be quite functional for it. I definitely prefer the feel of the Munetoshi in my hand. Dynamically, it feels better. It's a different thing, though. The Hanwei Tiger is a folded blade. It has some artistic qualities that the Munetoshi does not. It's made with a better feeling silk in my hand than the synthetic, whatever this stuff is made out of. They have kind of similar Ito tightnesses, but the fittings on the Hanwei are a little bit more for show and have more to offer. But this feels like a heavier, stouter blade in my hand. And the Munetoshi just feels really, really good. The closest thing that I can really compare this sword to that's from another company is the Hanwei Musashi XL. So I've cut with this sword a few times and I've held a few different examples. It's a fine feeling sword, and at $550 it's within the same general price ballpark as the Munetoshi Performance Cutter that I have here. However, I don't necessarily think it's as comfortable feeling. Unfortunately, I don't have one here to show you, but I think this sword is superior in terms of its dynamic properties and at least what I was capable of achieving with it. Having cut in the dojo with the Musashi XL as well, I really think that this one is a better cutter, at least for where I am as a practitioner. And that's really the mainstay, is that I think that this is a pretty good deal, but there's some caveats. One, this blade is cracked. So assuming that the blade isn't cracked, I can't necessarily just get over that this blade was cracked. I cut with it while it was cracked. The crack didn't expand. It didn't turn into a helicopter of death, but that flaw is a pretty big deal, and it's a safety issue, and hopefully if you buy one, it does not come with that, though I'd have to caution anyone that buys it to really double check the sword and make sure that there are no cracks. Manufacturing a thin blade is a tricky thing to do. The thicker they are, the more they seem to survive the heat treatment process. Though I'm not a manufacturer, I'm not a swordsmith, I don't really know. That's just what I've heard, and so I can understand that these are a little trickier to get out of quality control as a non-cracked blade, but that does make me nervous that it came cracked. Lastly, the handle didn't come off, and that from a tatami mat cutting perspective, you're probably not going to get gushes of water running into the handle, but you could. And not being able to take it apart was kind of a downside. Now maybe this is just a dud, and the crack and the handle not coming off are due to changes in climate and excuses and things like that. But those two factors make me say that maybe a different manufacturer's sword, maybe the Musashi XL is a better pick. Though still, knowing that, I would still take my chances on one of these. I find this sword to be very compelling in terms of how it feels. It cut like a laser beam. It feels really, really good in my hand. And at $425, it's cheaper than the Hanwei Musashi XL. And so, yeah, I think it's a great deal. I think it's a great deal, provided that it's not cracked. The handle coming off is really, a lot of people don't ever take it off anyway. So that's not a big deal to a lot of people. But a cracked blade is a pretty fucking big deal. So make sure that yours isn't cracked if you do opt to get one. Though I'd encourage you to maybe take a chance on it because it's quite a blade. Anyway, that's all I have for you. I hope it's been helpful. And as always, cheers and thanks for watching. Performance Cutting Katana T10 Shobuzakuri. It's a performance cutting katana, but it's really hardened Shobuzakuri Shinogi T10 Shobuzakuri Performance Cutting Katana, but actually no, it's not. T10 differentially hard. God damn it! Interrupting my shit all the time. Pretty cool thing to do. I should phrase this better. Blade, realistically, no, I don't need to point that out. Now let's talk about the saya. Let's not talk about the saya. No, let's talk about the saya. Roll and very easy to... Roll and very easy to... Roll and very easy to...